There's a moment, and if you've been through a layoff, you know exactly which moment I'm talking about. When you're walking out of the building carrying a box. Maybe it's a cardboard banker's box. Maybe it's a bag. Maybe it's just you, your laptop, and a coffee mug because you weren't given time to pack anything else. But there's a moment where you cross that threshold, and the life you had inside that building is now behind you, and everything ahead is unscripted. That box, whatever form it takes, weighs a lot more than its contents. I'm Rich Jones, and this is Live Without an Expiration Date, a show for experienced professionals navigating the space between being too good to quit and not ready to stop. Today, we're talking about layoffs, not the corporate language around them, not the 5 tips to bounce back. We're going to talk about what it actually feels like, what it actually does to you, and what it actually takes to move through it with your career and your sense of self intact. I want to be straightforward with you. At the top of this, at at the top. This episode is not going to tell you to reframe it as an opportunity. It's not going to tell you to update your LinkedIn profile today. I'm not going to say everything happens for a reason. Some things just happen. And when they happen to you, when you've given real years and real effort and real identity to a place, the honest first response isn't opportunity, it's loss. So let's start there. What actually happens in that moment? The call or the meeting usually lasts about 15 minutes, in some cases less. You may have seen it coming. There were signs, the quiet reorganization, the new leadership didn't ask many questions before making decisions, the budget freeze, the pattern of who was and wasn't getting pulled into rooms. You may have told yourself it was just the company going through changes, that you were insulated, that your track record protected you. Or you may have had absolutely no warning. You walked in Tuesday morning with a full plate and walked out by noon with a box. Either way, the moment it happens, most people describe the same experience, a kind of disassociation. Your brain keeps moving, but you're watching yourself from a few feet away. You say the right things, you nod, you shake hands, you hear words like restructuring and nothing to do with your performance, and we value what you've contributed. And some part of you is registering all of this, but another part of you is already doing something else entirely. It's starting the reckoning. The reckoning isn't about the job, not at first. The reckoning is about identity. Because here's the thing that no one talks about openly enough for experienced professionals, for people who have built careers over 15, 20, or even 30 years, the job isn't just a job. It became somewhere along the way a significant part of how you understand yourself. Your title was your shorthand. Your organization was your context. Your team was, in some meaningful sense, your community. And all of that in 15 minutes has changed. I want to name something specific here. There's a particular flavor of grief that comes with a layoff at this stage of a career. It's different from what a 27-year-old might feel. When you're 27 and you get laid off, it's frightening and disorienting. But there's a general sense, even if it doesn't feel that way in the moment, that the story isn't over, that there's time, that this is one chapter. But when you're 52, when you've been a VP or a director or a senior leader for years, the math starts to feel different. The questions that surface aren't just what's next, they're how much road is left And did I just lose a chunk of it? There, I'm always hireable in the market. I think I know. There, what does this say about me? I've been there, not in exactly those words, but I know that quiet. I know the drive home. I know sitting in your car in the driveway, not quite ready to go inside yet. Not because you didn't want to see the people you love, you do, but because the moment you walk through that door, it becomes real in a way that it wasn't in the parking lot. That's where this episode begins, the first 72 hours. And I want to talk about the first 72 hours specifically because they tend to get handled in one of two different ways. And one of those ways almost always makes things harder. The first way is what I'd call the performance okay. You go home, you tell the people that who need to know, you hold yourself together, you're measured and reasonable, and you talk about next steps in the job market and your network. You go to bed that night already mentally revising your resume. You wake up the next day and you get to work fast. You update your LinkedIn. You reach out to contacts. You get disciplined. You perform the resilience you think is expected of you. I understand the impulse. I felt it myself. There's a certain comfort in activity and doing something when the thing you just lost was largely defined by doing things. Action feels like agency. And agency, after an event that took all of your agency away in 15 minutes, feels necessary. But here's what happens when you move that fast. You skip the processing, and the processing doesn't disappear just because you skipped it. It just goes underground and it shows up later. In a job interview where you're performing confidence you don't actually feel yet. In the edge in your voice when you describe why you left. In the fatigue that sets in 2 months out when the hustle hasn't produced results and the emotional bills you didn't pay earlier now come due with interest. The second way is the opposite extreme, paralysis. You don't make calls, you don't update anything, you watch a lot of TV, you sleep more than usual, or you don't sleep enough. You cancel things, you pull back. The days start to blur, the job search doesn't start, and the weeks pass, and you started to drift. That's also real, and I'm not going to demoralize about it. Grief does that. Shock does that. The absence of structure does that. When your calendar was full for years and then suddenly isn't, the emptiness is its own kind of disorienting. The first 72 hours are not the time for either extreme. They're the time for something much simpler, absorbing the reality. Here's what I actually think is useful in those first 3 days. Not prescriptive. This isn't a checklist. It's more like permission. Give yourself the first day. Don't call anyone. Don't post anything. Don't make any decisions about next steps. You just had something significant happen to you. You're allowed to sit with it. Tell your immediate household yes, but don't perform the okayness that you don't feel yet. Take a walk if that helps. Sit in the backyard. Go to a movie. Do whatever lets your nervous system start to settle. Day 2, start to separate the practical from the emotional. The practical matters. You need to understand your severance, your benefits timeline, your COBRA window, and your non-compete obligations if you have them. These have actual deadlines, and they don't wait for you to feel better. You don't have to have it all figured out on day 2, but you should start to get your arms around what you're working with financially and legally. That's not hustling, that's just prudent. On day 3, give yourself one conversation, not a networking call, not a strategy session, one conversation with someone you genuinely trust, a mentor, a peer, a friend who's been through something similar, where you tell the truth about how you feel, not the version you're going to tell the market, the actual version. What conversation is worth more? That conversation is worth more than most of the other things you'll do in the first month. The reason I believe that, and I want to stay with this for a moment, is that how you feel about this layoff will shape everything about your job search if you don't address it. It will shape how you introduce yourself. It will shape how you talk about your last role. It will determine whether you come across as someone telling a story you've made peace with or someone who's still carrying the weight of a wound they haven't tended. The market doesn't reward bitterness. It doesn't reward performed enthusiasm either. It rewards authenticity. And authenticity requires that you've actually processed what happens. That takes more than 72 hours, but it starts there. The identity unraveling and why it's worth taking seriously. I want to spend some real time on the identity piece because I think it's the most underestimated dimension of what a layoff does to an experienced professional. Most of us are not particularly good at separating who we are from what we do. And that's not a character flaw. It's partly a function of how seriously we've taken our work. If you've given genuine years to building something, to leading something, to transforming something, if you've stayed late and cared and taking the wins and the losses personally, then the work became part of you. And when the work goes away, suddenly a part of you goes with it. This feeling of loss shows up in a lot of different ways. Some people stop feeling like they have standing in professional conversations. They go quiet at industry events, if they go at all. They don't post on LinkedIn because they don't quite know what to say or what persona to inhabit now that the title is gone. They feel like they're on the outside of something they used to be inside of. Some people feel a version of shame. That doesn't make rational sense, but it's completely real. Even when they intellectually know the layoff wasn't about their performance, even when they understand the business dynamics behind it, there's still a social story that says people who are valuable don't get let go. And that story lives just below the surface of how they interact with former colleagues and recruiters and with their own network. Some people feel, and I want to name this one carefully, relief mixed in with the grief. And when they feel guilty about and then they feel guilty about the relief because maybe the culture had gotten difficult. Maybe the leadership had stopped listening. Maybe the work had stopped being meaningful. And when it ended, some part of you exhaled. And then you look at that exhale and you wonder what it says about you that you feel relieved about something that's supposed to be a loss. It says you're human. That's all it says. The identity unraveling is real. And the reason I think it's worth taking seriously rather than bypassing in a rush to find the next thing is this. The next version of your career gets built on whatever foundation you're standing on right now. And if that foundation is shaky, if you're walking into conversations carrying unprocessed shame or unacknowledged grief or a performance of confidence that hasn't caught up to your actual inner state, the foundation shakes too. There's a concept I come back to often in this work, the contribution conversation. It's something I'll do a full episode on, but the short version is this. Your value is not your title. Your value is not your last employer. Your value is not the salary you used to make. Your value is the specific things you know how to do, the specific problems you know how to solve, the judgment you've built over the years that is actually yours, not the organization's. The box they gave you to carry out doesn't contain that. That's still with you. But to access it, to articulate it with conviction, you have to have done the internal work of separating what you lost from what you still have. That's the work of this phase. I want to say one thing about this, and then we'll move forward. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with a layoff at this stage of a career. Your peers are still employed. Your network is still busy. Your calendar, which was full of meetings and decisions and forward momentum, is suddenly open. There's a silence in the middle of the week that feels almost wrong. That silence is hard, especially for people who define themselves by their productivity, especially for people who, if you're honest, have sometimes put work ahead of everything else in their life and now are sitting with the bill for that. I'm not here to tell you how to feel about that. I'm just to say you don't have to fill that silence immediately. It's allowed to be quiet for a while. And if you can stay with it without panicking, there is usually something worth hearing in that quiet. Today, let's start moving towards the practical, what the market actually requires of you. You will at some point, and for most people, it's sooner than feels emotionally right, need to re-enter the market. And I want to talk honestly about what that requires, because the gap between what people think it requires and what it actually requires is significant. Here's what most people think it requires: an updated resume, check. An active LinkedIn profile, check. A list of contacts to reach out to, check. And persistence, check. Those things are necessary, but they're not sufficient. What the market actually requires of you, especially at the senior level, is a clear and confident account of who you are and what you bring, delivered in a way that sounds like you believe it, truly, not a performance of belief, actual conviction about your own value. And this is the problem. If you haven't done the identity work we talked about in the last segment, if you're still carrying the weight of the layoff in ways you haven't acknowledged, that comes through. Not usually in what you say, but in how you say it. In the subtle defensiveness when people ask about your departure. In the slight over-explanation of why the layoff happened and why it wasn't your fault. In the energy of someone who is trying to prove something rather than someone who is offering something. Hiring at the senior level is almost entirely a trust transaction. The people who are deciding whether to bring you in as an executive or a fractional leader or a senior contributor, they're not primarily evaluating your resume. They're evaluating whether they want to be in the room with you, whether your presence creates confidence, whether you seem like someone who has perspective and steadiness and earned judgment. The resume gets you the conversation. You choose it. And you close it. Now, what does it take to show up with that kind of presence that closes it? First, you need a clear, clean narrative about what happened. Not a long one, a clear one. Something like, I was part of a broad restructuring that eliminated my division. It gave me the opportunity to step back and be deliberate about where I want to focus the next chapter of my career. And that's led me here. That's enough. You don't need to defend it. You don't need to preemptively prove it wasn't performance related. A clear, undefended statement is far more credible than an elaborate one. Second, you need to be able to talk about your work in terms of impact, not role. Not, I was responsible for, but what I built and what I produced was. The distinction matters. Responsible for is passive, it's a job description. What I built is active. It's a story about what you actually did with the responsibility you were given. Third, you need to know what you want. This one is harder than it sounds. After a layoff, a lot of people default to wanting something like what I had or just something good. But vagueness signals uncertainty, and uncertainty at the senior level is disqualifying in most contexts. You don't need to have a single rigid target, but you need to be able to say with conviction, here is the kind of problem I'm built to solve, and here is the kind of organization where I do that best. That level of clarity is magnetic. It tells the other person you're not just available, you're selective. Selective is respectable. I'll say one more thing about the market before we move on. The senior job search takes longer than most people expect, and that timeline is almost impossible emotionally to prepare for. You may have been hired quickly in the past or moved between roles without ever really searching. This experience is difficult, it's slower, it's less legible, and it requires a patience that doesn't come naturally to action-oriented people. Plan for longer, not because you'll necessarily need it, but because planning for it gives you permission to do this right instead of doing it fast. The social dimension, your network, your relationships, and what actually helps. Let's talk about the people in your life because a layoff doesn't happen to you in isolation. Your title will show up for you in the search, and you'll largely show up in a way they know how, which means most of them will offer to connect you to someone or or to send your resume along or to make an intro. That's real and valuable, and you should let them do that graciously without over explaining, without burdening the exchange with the emotional weight of what you're going through. Just thank you. I'd appreciate that. Here's what I'm looking for. But there's another category of people in your network that matters even more right now, and it's smaller. The people who know you well enough to give you honest feedback, not cheerleaders, not people who tell you you are amazing and then it's their loss. People who would tell you the truth about how you're coming across, who will sit with you after a mock interview and say, that story you told about why you left, it lands a little defensive. Here's what I'm hearing. Seek those people out. Be honest with them about what you need. Don't protect them from the reality of where you are. The most valuable professional relationship you have right now are the ones where you can afford to be imperfect. Now, your immediate relationships, your partner, your family, the people who share your daily life. This is where I want to be careful and direct because there's a lot of people, men especially, who handle things poorly, not out of bad intent, out of pride usually, out of the same impulse that drives the performance of okay. The people who love you need to actually know what's going on. not the heavily edited version, not the I've got a plan that I'm working on it version. They need to know if you're struggling. They need to know if the silence of the middle of the week is getting to you. They need to know if you're starting to question yourself in ways that feel unfamiliar. Not because you need them to fix it, you don't, but because carrying it alone is genuinely harder than carrying it together. And the people who love you deserve to be in the room with the real version of what's happening. I'll tell you something I've observed. The people who handle layoffs best in terms of their actual career outcomes and their emotional health are the ones are not necessarily the ones who move fastest. They're the ones who are most honest with themselves and the people around them about where they actually are. That honesty isn't weakness. It's the foundation of the kind of presence we talk about in the last segment. One more thing on the social side. Be careful about social media, specifically LinkedIn in the early weeks. There's a strong pull to post something about your transition, to signal that you're exploring exciting opportunities or looking for the next challenge or available to work. And sometimes that's the right move. And I'll talk about that when it is in a moment. I'll talk about it in a moment. But sometimes it's premature. Sometimes you post before you've done the internal work, before you have a clear narrative. And the post reads like someone who's a little lost, trying not to look at. Recruiters and senior leaders read that clearly. It's better to post nothing for a while than to post something that signals unresolved uncertainty. When you're ready, when you can write about your transition from a place of clarity rather than anxiety, post with intention. Say something real. Say something specific about what you're looking for and why. Something that sounds like you. That's the post that works. And you'll know when you're ready to write it. Let's talk about the longer arc and what this experience actually gives you. I said at the top of this episode, I wasn't going to tell you that this is an opportunity. I meant that, and I still mean it. But I want to say something honest about what this experience, when you're through it, tends to give experienced professionals because it's real and because it would be dishonest of me to ignore it in a show about career longevity. The people I've watched navigate layoffs well, not fast, not painlessly, but well, almost universally come out on the other side with something they didn't have before, a sharper understanding of what they actually want. Not, not what they've been trained to want, not what the market tells them they should want, what they actually want. The structure of employment, especially for the senior level, as a way of eliminating that question. You're busy, you're advancing, you're doing the next thing and the thing after that. The question of whether this is what you'd choose if you were choosing from first principles rarely gets asked because the answer doesn't change anything. You're already there. A layoff forces the question, and that's not comfortable, but it's real. And the answers, if you'll actually sit with the question rather than rushing past it, tend to matter. Some people discover they want a fundamentally different kind of work, not a different company doing the same thing, actually different work, work that uses different parts of who they are. Some people discover they want to work differently. Fractional roles, consulting, portfolio work, the freedom to bring their expertise to multiple places without giving all of it to one. Some people discover that they valued most about their former role was a specific kind of problem And they can find that problem in 100 different contexts. And that understanding opens the market to ways they didn't expect. And some people discover they want exactly what they had, just at a different organization. And that clarity, knowing it with certainty rather than assumption, changes how they pursue it. None of these are automatic upside and are the automatic upside of getting laid off. They require work, the honest internal reckoning that we've been talking about throughout this episode. They don't happen if you bypass the process. They happen as a result of the process. I've been doing this long enough, both living it and working with people through it, to believe something that might sound counterintuitive. The professionals who give themselves permission to feel the full weight of what a layoff takes from them are the same ones who are most capable of naming what they still have. The weight and the inventory are connected, and you can't skip the first to get to the second. So, a practical checklist, what to do and when. I want to give you something concrete before we close, not a list. I said at the top, we weren't doing that, but a framework of how to think about time in this process. In the first week, absorb, handle the immediate practical items, severance reviews, benefits, non-compete if applicable. Have one honest conversation with someone you trust. Don't make any major career decisions. Don't post anything public. In weeks 2 and 3, start the internal inventory. What are the 3 or 4 things I am genuinely excellent at? What kinds of problems have I solved that other people consistently couldn't? What does the work I'm proudest of have in common? This isn't a resume exercise. It's a self-knowledge exercise. The resume comes later. This comes first. In the first month, develop your narrative. The 30-second version of who you are and what you're looking for. And the 2-minute version. Practice it with people you trust before you take it to the market. Be sure it sounds like you, not like a LinkedIn summary you found somewhere. In months 2 through 4, work the market with patience and intentionality. Prioritize quality over volume. A thoughtful outreach to 15 people who actually know your work is worth more than 200 cold applications. Stay visible in your industry, events, conversations, writing, if that's in your toolkit. Don't go quiet. Throughout, manage your energy. The job search is a long endeavor and it requires a kind of sustained engagement that is genuinely exhausting. Build structure into your days, not because it will make you feel like you have a job, but because human beings operate better with rhythm than without. Exercise, sleep, maintain the relationships outside of work that matter to you. Don't make the search your entire identity. That pressure makes you worse at it. And stay honest with yourself about where you are emotionally. If you hit a wall at month 3, if the rejections are accumulating and the confidence is eroding, that's not weakness. That's a predictable part of the process. Name it. Talk to someone. Adjust. Don't white knuckle through it. I want to close this episode the way I opened it, with the box. You walked out carrying it, and I said it weighs more than its contents. What I want to say now, at the end of 30 minutes of sitting with this honestly, is that the weight isn't permanent. It changes. Not because the layoff stops being real, not because the loss gets unhappened, but because you, over time, do the work of separating what was taken from and what is still yours. Your judgment is yours. The problems you know how to solve, yours. The relationships you built, the decisions you made under pressure, the leadership you gave in hard moments, the things you do differently and know you do differently because you've been honest with yourself about them, is all of that is yours. The box was never the point. The box was just the container. I made this show because I know what it's like to be experienced and excellent and suddenly unmoored. I know what it's like to be too much for some rooms and not quite the right fit for others, to be in the middle of a career and still have real distance to run, but that requires something different than what you've been doing. The layoff is one version of what that experience is one version of that experience. It's among the most acute. And what I want you to carry out of this episode, not in a box, this is the people who come through it with their career and their sense of self intact are not the ones who move fastest or grieved least. They're the ones who are honest about what it cost them and disciplined about figuring out what they still had to offer. You have more to offer than the last 15 minutes of your previous chapter. Take the time to know it, then go build something with it. In next week's episode, we will be talking about the contribution conversation. I'm Rich Jones. This is Live Without an Expiration Date. If this episode was useful to you, share it with someone who's carrying a box right now. They may not be ready to listen to all 30 minutes, but the fact that you thought of them matters. And if you have a story others could learn from, message me to record our conversation. I'll see you next episode.